You've probably heard the term trust before, and you may have heard the term testamentary trust before. What is that? So think about this. You know what a last will is, a last will and testament. Well, that gives you a clue what a testamentary trust is. It is a trust that is created by your will. It doesn't exist during your lifetime because it's in your will, and your will has no effect until you die. So upon your death, your will now comes into effect through a probate process, and the trust in your will is now created through that process. So you heard me say probate, you heard me say will, you heard me say probate. A lot of people are under the misunderstanding that a will means you won't have a probate. Actually, it's the opposite. A will typically mean that you will have a probate upon your death so that your estate is probated, your assets go where you want them to go. If your will contains a testamentary trust, that means some of the assets will pay to a trust for your beneficiaries. I know that this is sounding complicated, but stick with me. There are good reasons to have a trust in your will. In the state of Washington, for example, the only way that a couple can protect money for the surviving spouse when the first spouse dies is if they do so through a will that contains a testamentary trust. That means probate. So on the death of the first spouse, half the assets, if not more, will fund the trust for the surviving spouse, the testamentary trust. How is that done? It's done through probate. Why would you go through the probate process? Why? It's because there's a benefit, a huge benefit to having testamentary trusts in the state of Washington. One of the primary benefits of this kind of trust is that all the assets in that trust are not considered countable by Medicaid or by the state. So if that surviving spouse ever needs long-term care, none of that money in the trust is going to be counted against their eligibility for the state paying for their long-term care. And long-term care costs can be expensive. They can be over $10,000 a month, which could quickly deplete somebody's money. So a really large benefit of having a testamentary trust is you can protect money for your spouse. What are some other benefits? Creditors can't touch anything in that trust. Bankruptcy won't affect if there's any money in that trust. It's not subject to creditors or bankruptcy. Money in that trust will go where you wanted it to go. Let's say you're part of a couple, you are the spouse who dies first, your money goes into the trust for your surviving spouse. What happens when your surviving spouse dies? The money will go where you said you wanted to go. For example, down to your kids, as opposed to the other situation, which sometimes happens if there isn't a trust, and if all the money instead went outright to the surviving spouse, that surviving spouse could remarry. That surviving spouse could redirect the assets to go elsewhere, to a new family that you've never met, and your kids end up getting nothing. So by having a testamentary trust, you know that your kids are at least going to get what was your share of your and your spouse's estate. The spouse will not be able to redirect where that money goes. It'll go down to your kids. Other reasons, are there tax benefits to having this type of trust? Absolutely, especially in the state of Washington. Our credit exclusion amount for taxes is $2.193 million right now. So if the couple, for example, has more money than that, we want to make sure that we capture the first spouse to die their credit exclusion amount. And you can do that through a testamentary trust. That gets a little bit more complicated, but I just want to point out that there are tax benefits as well to having this type of trust when it comes to estate taxes. Trusts don't have to be the kind that I was just talking about for a spouse. Testamentary trusts are often set up for people who have minor children. I mean, children can't inherit outright. They are considered under the law to be incompetent if they're under the age of 18. So you would want money that goes to your kids who are minors to go to this trust created by your will, a testamentary trust. Somebody else is the trustee. They're making sure your kids are taken care of. There's money there for college if that's what they want. And then perhaps at some time when your minor children become adults, they might receive that money outright. Sometimes money is kept in trust for the rest of that person's life because there's good tax planning reasons to do that as well. It really depends on what your situation is. Your estate planning lawyer can help provide you more details based on what your particular situation is. So having a testamentary trust is a fundamental estate planning technique that is used. Don't be off-put by that because it requires a probate. Frankly, probate sometimes is the only and the best way to accomplish the result that is best for you and for your family.